American Football Stories is brought to you by CoachPaint. CoachPaint is a great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips similar to the graphics you see on TV. CoachPaint offers the ability to clearly tellustrate video while increasing retention of information in a shorter amount of time. Up your game with CoachPaint today.
What time is it? Game time! It's gonna be special. They gonna talk about this forever.
Welcome to American Football Stories.
Puts his head down, crashes and spins, and dives. Touchdown!
Bringing together the many perspectives that make up college football in the NFL.
Football is one of the greatest sports ever invented.
From players and coaches.
Believe, baby, believe, baby.
Hey, we playing to win right here, fellas.
To the front office and scouts.
The public is finally beginning to catch up, but they don't even know half the truth.
Us against the world, let's get it.
Your hosts, Robert Parker and Nick Knudsen, bring you American Football Stories.
Welcome to the American Football Stories podcast brought to you by CoachPaint. Today is December 21st, 2020. My name is Nick Knudsen. My co-host is Robert Parker. On this episode, we'll recap the conference championship weekend in college football and we'll give our thoughts on the college football playoff. As usual, in this 2020 season, we've opened up by acknowledging the cancellations on this week's games. Several games canceled. Only one that really mattered, though, was Louisiana at Coastal Carolina, Sun Belt title. They just declared them co-champions, Rob. Pretty disappointing way to end the season for Coastal Carolina, if I don't mind saying. It looks like they're not going to make that game up.
Yeah, you kind of wanted them to kind of make that game just to kind of have the season that Coastal Carolina was having. I mean, You kind of want to see them finish that thing out and kind of host a trophy and just kind of have that feeling with the team that these other conferences had for championship weekend. So I kind of feel like Coastal Carolina was robbed in that regards, but I know co-champs is not the sole champ of the conference, but hey, it's better than nothing and hell of a season for Coastal Carolina.
Yeah, and of course, Louisiana, it's their third trip in a row to the Sun Belt title game, so they would have had something to say about that. But I was looking forward to that game. That would have been a fun matchup with Louisiana and Coastal Carolina. However, one of the things I completely overlooked, normally I'm used to a little break in my head between conference championships and bowl games. Bowl games start Monday, Rob. They're not. We don't have any space. There's no space to make this game up. So if you want to play your bowl game, you got to play the bowl game. But man, I'd almost rather see the Sun Belt play their title game than just those two skip out on a bowl game. I think that's a more valuable game, but that's just me. But probably less money for the conference that way. So the other games that were canceled: UL Monroe, Troy, Purdue, Indiana, Georgia Tech, Miami, Arizona, Cal, Georgia, Vandy, Michigan at Iowa, Florida State at Wake Forest, SMU at UTSA, Michigan State at Maryland. On Friday night, the Pac-12 title game, the Oregon Ducks replaced the Washington Huskies as the Pac-12 North champion. They go down to USC, and all I saw was a bunch of kids from LA beating up on the Trojans, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, one of those kids that was beating up on the Trojans was defensive end Kevin Thibodeau. So he's definitely a beast, and he was getting pressure on, Kadon Slavis pretty much the whole game. And that Oregon defense really came to play with Noel Sewell and Mason Funa and company. I really thought USC was going to go out and win this game and kind of, put themselves in that college football playoffs, but Oregon had something to say, and they came out with the win.
Slavis is 6'2". I saw more batted balls from that Oregon defense. I mean, I think they intercepted one of them on the goal line, one of the tip balls, but the Oregon front was just they were pretty vicious all night. I thought they were in his face and they were batting footballs down. I thought it was a good defensive victory by Oregon, pretty much. The offense did their job, but you started early with a couple interceptions that really set the tone for the game.
Yeah, and it really seemed like USC couldn't stop the run either. Travis Dye was kind of running all over them I know CJ Verdell was a healthy scratch, but I'm pretty sure he's chalking that up to kind of, saving his legs and saving his body for the NFL draft. So, but Travis Dye carried this Oregon offense to a victory, and just like you said, Nick, that defense really came out to play. And Kadon Slavis really looked shaky the whole game. He had some couple good throws in there to Bruce McCoy, but for the most part, that Oregon defense kind of they saddle up and they got the win.
Yeah, Brew had some nice catches there. I think that USC offense they didn't really get off the ground, and we've seen this USC team win in a shaky fashion several times this year, even though they were 5-0. It's one of the reasons why you had to believe the playoff committee wasn't too high on them, even though I've been critical of that fact. But hey, USC goes from being undefeated, talking about the college football playoff, to saying, you know what, we're good on a bowl game. We're not going to play anyway. So they're claiming it's medical advisors telling them not to go. All right. Well, those same medical advisors, I guess, weren't telling them to play football this past weekend, but that's a different story. So USC not going to a bowl game. Oregon, Pac-12 champions, not the Pac-12 North champions, just the Pac-12 as a whole champions. Seems like a fitting way to end this season in the Pac-12, doesn't it?
It really does, and that's back to back for Oregon, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you're not.
And it goes to show you why Oregon kind of locked up Mario Cristobal moving forward.
Yep.
So I think this Oregon team, with the season that it's been with the pandemic and COVID this year, you really didn't see this Oregon team flourish, but they definitely have a lot of talent. And Mario Cristobal, we know what he can do on the recruiting trail. So I think I expect this Oregon team to keep rolling off these Pac-12 championships moving forward, unless USC can actually, kind of ride the ship and knock them off. But I really see Oregon being the premier team out of this conference.
Yeah, and they will be representing the Pac-12. I want to say, are they the only team going bowling out of the Pac-12? I need to double check that. But they will be representing the Pac-12 in the Fiesta Bowl against Iowa State. That should be a decent matchup, right?
Yeah, definitely a decent matchup. Definitely from the different coaching styles between Matt Campbell and Mario Cristobal. But once again, I in this particular game, I give the edge to Oregon. I think they just have better playmakers on both sides of the ball, and they're going to get the job done.
All right. Also on Friday here, UAB takes down Marshall 22-13. Marshall starts out 7-0 on the season. They finished 7-2. UAB though, third straight Conference USA title. Not a bad run there. Or you know what? FAU won 2 years ago, didn't they? It's a third straight appearance in the conference title game. Second straight. They've won 2 of the last 3. God, let's make that easy. UAB, second title in the last 3 years. Good game here. Not too high scoring. They kept it was 9-0 at halftime. The UAB defense was certainly on hand in this game. It kept a Marshall attack that was pretty decent this season down. I think Marshall, you get this late in the season, you never know who you're missing and everything. Marshall seemed to really struggle, though. They couldn't get the passing game going, only 138 yards on 8 completions, Rob.
Yeah, I tell you what, this UAB program, ever since it's kind of came back, it's really been a thorn in the side in that particular conference. And I was a little bit disappointed in Marshall. I thought they would go out and get the win and win the conference championship. But UAB is a tough team, tough program, goodwill coach team. So they actually came out and they got the victory. So you tip your hats off to UAB. But hell of a season for Marshall, but you just kind of want to see them finish it and wrap it up with the conference championship.
Are you hearing any rumors about Bill Clark going to Auburn?
I kind of see his name floating around there, but I just don't see that hiring happening, if you ask me. But I mean, it's definitely good for his brand to have his name mentioned with Auburn.
Yeah, Auburn coaching search. That could be an episode in and of itself. We might have to do an entire episode on that one because I don't understand what's going on there. Let's go to the MAC. Buffalo falls to Ball State, 38-28. The Bulls were unbeaten coming into this game. Ball State improves to 6-1 and wins the MAC. I believe it's their first MAC title man, didn't they have an unbeaten team one year? I'm going years back here. I thought they had one unbeaten team. I'm looking it up right now as we speak. But Buffalo, second loss in the MAC title game in the last 3 years here. Yeah, I think it was in 08. Ball State, I think they were unbeaten in 08 and they lost to Buffalo in the MAC championship game here, tracking it down. Yeah, it's Brady Hoke, right? Remember that Brady Hoke Ball State team? I think this was the team that got him the San Diego State job. So rematch from that 2008 MAC championship game. Ball State comes out on top this time, 38-28. And I really thought that we could be seeing Buffalo lose their head coach to Illinois this week, Lance Leopold. But Illinois went in a different direction, hiring Brett Bielema. But talk about this Buffalo program and what you saw from them this year. I know you had projected that they would win the MAC this year. What did they do? Why didn't they get it done on Friday night against Ball State?
Yeah, this is probably one of the most disappointing performance for me, especially with Buffalo. I thought they was just gonna, steamroll Ball State in the MAC championship, but Ball State actually came out to play. Buffalo made some plays early in the game, but it just seemed like they couldn't get that offense clicking. In the second half, and Jared Patterson didn't have that big game that we're normally used to see him have. So I think that was the big issue right there. They kind of, they didn't stop him, but they kind of contained him a little bit. And that was pretty much the tipping point for the game. And Ball State came out victorious and won a conference championship. So tough season for Buffalo, but you kind of want to see them end it out with the conference championship. But I was a big Buffalo guy. I've been talking about them, boosting them up on the pod all season long, but definitely disappointing because I thought they were, definitely a lock to kind of win their conference championship.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing the MAC get back to playing a full season of football. They were one of those conferences that had canceled early and decided to come back. So glad we got to see a little bit of action this year, but it definitely felt weird. It still feels weird that this was even championship weekend because some of these conferences you feel like we just got them back and now we're ending already. It's just a weird feeling. Nebraska 28, Rutgers 21 on Friday night. Don't know how many people were tuned into that one, but Nebraska gets the job done. And good win for Scott Frost there. I believe that's the third. Yep. What's up?
Give me an unplug.
Back.
Perfect. So just
all right. I'm gonna cut after Buffalo.
Yeah, cut after Buffalo and just start back with
okay.
Nebraska Rutgers.
I'm not gonna go on. I'll just tell. Yeah. All right. Back in 3, 2, 1. Action. All right. To wrap up Friday night, Nebraska 28, Rutgers 21. Moving to Saturday, the number 1 Alabama Crimson tied 52. The number 7 Florida Gators 46. This game, on paper, the 6-point win looks great for the Gators. The Gators definitely played well offensively. Definitely played well in the second half too. I mean, they really outscored Alabama 29-17 the second half. Florida showed their potential in this game. You saw flashes of how good this team can be, but the problem is you give up 35 points in the first half and you let Najee Harris do whatever he wants and Mac Jones to convert every third down under the sun, and then you give up a fumble off an interception and penalty after penalty to keep Alabama on the field on third downs. That's probably not going to be a recipe to win you many games against Alabama.
Yeah, it's really not. When you play Alabama, which is the cream of the cream, you can't make those mental mistakes. You can't turn the ball over. You pretty much have to play a clean game. And in the second half, Florida played a little bit cleaner game than what they did in the first half. But ultimately, it came down to, the defense. And that's what we've been preaching about all season long, Nick. Can this Florida defense hold up? And I think they did a formidable job in the second half. But,
Yep.
That touchdown that Florida gave up before halftime, that was crucial. And then the fumble that the interception that Trey Dean got early on, and then he fumbled with the John Mechie hit, and then Alabama goes back and scores. So that
was that targeting?
I don't think it was targeting.
Man,
it was
it sure
a
looked
blind,
like targeting to me.
it was a blind side hit. It was a great hit for John Mechie. I just think, where you're in that position as a defensive back and you kind of get the interception, you kind of have to keep your head on the swivel. And Trey Dean didn't keep his head on the swivel, and ultimately he ended up fumbling. Alabama goes and puts it in for 6. So, but ultimately, Florida gave Alabama all problems that they could handle. Kyle Pitts, Trevon Grimes, and Kadarius Toney just had a field day with this Alabama defense. And I know Patrick Surtain might be the number 1 corner coming off the board in the NFL draft, but hey, he got beat like a drum. This Florida offense is a juggernaut. Kyle Trask definitely had a Heisman season. He may not win the Heisman Trophy, but he definitely should be in that conversation. I know they're doing it virtually this year. They're not going to New York, but he definitely should be in that virtual Heisman conversation. But Alabama, ultimately, they just have too many weapons with Najee Harris, Devontae Smith, Mechie. Mac Jones had a tremendous game, throwing for over 400 yards, actually setting the SEC championship record, beating Danny Wolford. And you know who was right behind him? Kyle Trask. So they both threw for over 400 yards on the game. So this was probably one of the best, conference games that we had this weekend.
Trask was fantastic. Definitely lived up to, he put up Heisman numbers, that's for sure. Over 400 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Kadarius Toney, Kyle Pitts, both showed up in big ways. Over 150 yards for Toney, 129 for Pitts. Both had TDs. But Trevon Grimes made some plays. That was great. What did you think of Grimes showing up? And then what did you think of what clearly was part of the game plan, the check at the line where Kyle Trask was running up the middle for 15 times for a total of 0 yards, thanks to some sacks taking away yardage?
Yeah, I think Dan Mullen he called a hell of a game from an offensive standpoint. It's a couple of throws that Kyle Trask wish he could have had back, especially that Justin Shorter, route where he
does not miss those.
He doesn't miss those too much, but I mean, in that particular point, you kind of have to know who you're throwing to. Justin Shorter is not, one of those guys that can stretch the field like Toney and Grimes that has that top end speed. But he, with that throw, I wish Kyle Trask could have, put a little bit more air on it and let Justin Shorter run on it, because he's not a speed guy. But that throw, if he hits Justin Shorter on that, that's 6,
Yeah.
He's running in the end zone. So it's a couple of throws that Kyle Trask wish he could have had back. But I think, Dan Mullen calling a game plan where Kyle Trask is actually, running like a quarterback draw and running like a Tim Tebow or Dak Prescott. I thought that was an awesome wrinkle that the Alabama defense had no answer for, because as you see, Florida was going empty set and it was like nobody in the box. So Kyle Trask was just getting those, easy 4 to 3 yards, 5 yards, and getting it in for the touchdown. So I thought that was awesome play calling on Dan Mullen's part.
Good fight by the Gators in the second half. Nothing to hang your head about. Obviously not a program that prides itself on just making it to Atlanta, though. Definitely see a difference in some of the, especially I feel like on the defensive front up the middle. I feel like Florida's got to get a little stronger up the middle coming in next season. They need some guys that can really lay some hits, and it just feels like that Florida defense lacked physicality this year and probably wasn't a great year for COVID. Definitely I think that impacted the Florida defense. We talked to head coach Kevin Kelly out of the Pulaski Academy in Arkansas. He talked about how the defense was the most impacted this offseason by the lack of hitting. And I believe it. I believe that, it's and not even so much the hitting, just the practicing as a full defense. You got to be able to go full speed sometimes, and the defense definitely wasn't able to do that. Alabama, not that they played great defense, by the way, but their offense, Mac Jones, Heisman candidate, 5 touchdowns. Devontae Smith, Heisman candidate, 15 receptions, 184 yards, 2 touchdowns. Great numbers, guys. But to me, if I'm watching this game, I think we need to completely reevaluate the Najee Harris Heisman train and get on board that, because that looked like the Heisman winner to me on Saturday night. 31 carries, 178 yards, 2 touchdowns, 5 receptions, 67 yards for 3 touchdowns. He made the Gators look silly. He ran through them. He jumped over them. He did whatever he wanted. He was unbelievable on Saturday night. I thought he was the real difference in the game.
Yeah, he really was. And once again, that was a weapon that Alabama had that was kind of unstoppable. Great play calling for Sark that was kind of putting Najee Harris in these, mismatches from a receiving standpoint. But how I tell you what, Najee Harris draft stock just boosted tremendously, because he just showed that not only he can run the ball between the tackles, but he can line up at receiver and he can catch the ball out of the backfield. So I really think this Najee Harris Heisman conversation needs to gear up towards him winning it more so than Mac Jones and Devontae Smith. Yep. But ultimately, I think Mac Jones gets it because he's a quarterback, and it's kind of turning into a quarterback award. However, even though from a Heisman standpoint, majority of the Heisman Trophy winners are running back. So hopefully Najee Harris can kind of bring that back to the running back position. But you're right about that, Nick. Najee Harris was just a man amongst boys. And, it just seems like this Florida defense just didn't even have an answer for him or a player that they could match up. And normally that player a couple of seasons ago you would have thought would be Amari Burney, playing that star role. But he couldn't do anything with Najee Harris. But I know we've been bashing the Florida secondary all year long, but I tell you what, Brad Stewart made a hell of a play against Devontae Smith on a post route where he could have intercepted the ball, but he got a pass deflection, and then Kaiir Elam stepped up and made a third down stop on Devontae Smith in open field. So it's definitely talent in that secondary, but just like you said, I think the continuity wasn't there because of COVID. And Todd Grantham, for some reason, seemed like he couldn't come around to actually dialing up the play calling that he normally will dial up as far as blitzing and everything. So you take your hats off to this Florida team. They had a hell of a season. They play Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl.
Yeah, that'll be a fun matchup too.
It should be a fun matchup. Cal Pitts declared for the NFL draft, so he's not playing in this one. I just want to kind of see what other players kind of go that route. Maybe Kadarius Toney don't play. Maybe Grimes don't play. I really think Kyle Trask plays because he was fired up. Did you get to see his post-game interview?
Yeah, I saw a little bit about it. It seems to have started some talk about whether or not he's going to come back next year.
What are your thoughts on that, Nick? Do you think
he can. I think he'd be a maniac if he did. Why? What do you need to prove? What else is there to prove you're Kyle Trask?
I mean, would this be like a Travis Etienne decision coming back where, you're a clear-cut first-round pick, but you want to come back to kind of win a national championship? So
is that why Etienne came back? I mean, but Etienne too. What did he really gain by coming back this year? He probably would have been better off going, you could argue. I think Trask should go. I think when your stock's high, I mean, what is Trask? Is Trask the third rated quarterback in this class, at worst fourth?
I can see him being boosted up to third, but I mean, worst case scenario,
Trey Lance jumps ahead of him?
Maybe Trey Lance jumps ahead of him, and then you still got Zach Wilson and Mac Jones.
Right? Yeah.
I think he's fighting for that, that third to fifth quarterback taken off the board. And at this moment, I just think his stock is just so high that I don't think if he comes back and win a national championship, I don't think he puts up the numbers that he did this year. But I just don't see him coming back, and it's helping his stock moving forward. So I think he should just go ahead and enter the draft.
Yep.
And kind of see where the chips fall from the quarterback position.
I think what we saw on Saturday night, we haven't talked about this much this year. I did a post-game recap with Will Miles from Read and Reaction on the YouTube channel at Read and Reaction about this game. And one of the things I brought up was, and we talked about it with Matt Waldman a little bit. Hey, look, we haven't been talking about this much because Kyle Trask's been lighting it up on the statistics page, but Dan Mullen misses having a running quarterback. Don't kid yourself. And we saw that Saturday night, didn't we? We saw he was calling a lot of quarterback runs. And Kyle Trask, I happen to think his best attribute as a runner is that he's 6'5" and he can fall forward. He's tall and he can fall forward. He's tough runner. He puts his head down. He has no problem throwing his body in there, but he's just not that quick, right? We saw Emory Jones, who's the future of the quarterback position at Florida. You have to think, get in there. He busted out 2 runs for 24 yards, including a 17-yard run on the second drive of the game, I believe. Hey, that's what Florida wants to do. The running game has really struggled this year when you don't have that running threat at quarterback at that position. We saw that a couple years ago with Dwayne Haskins at Ohio State, right? Where Urban Meyer didn't have that running quarterback, and it was a different system. It was a little bit of a different system when you don't have that runner. And you know, we saw the difference from to a more extreme example from Tebow to John Brantley at Florida, right? Chris Leak to Tebow. We saw, so when you don't have that top tier runner like an Emory Jones at quarterback, that offense looks a lot different. Now, thankfully, Kyle Trask makes it up completely in the passing game because the guy is just, I mean, you saw some of those passes he dropped in on Saturday night. Incredible. So we haven't talked about missing that element too much, but it's going to be a different offense when he goes. And I think Dan Mullen, I think the Gators, they're ready for that transition. I think if he came back, it would definitely upset the balance because you got some young quarterbacks in the wings with Del Rio coming in. You have Anthony Richardson already in there and Emory Jones. So there's a little bit of a slotted order kind of set up where if Kyle Trask comes back, that would probably upset the balance of the quarterback position in Gainesville. But I don't think anyone would complain about having Trask back, obviously. But I think it would create maybe a transfer situation with Emory Jones.
Yeah, and I've been hitting the message boards heavy for Gator Nation, and that's the sentiments that a lot of the Gator fans are sharing. They kind of want Kyle Trask to make that jump to the NFL so we can actually see Emory Jones play for a full season. Yeah. And just like you said, Dan Mullen wants a running quarterback. You know, he's always had a running quarterback. He had Tebow. He had Dak Prescott. So when he has that quarterback that can actually run the ball, you know, it's definitely a difference maker. But just like you said, Kyle Trask made up for it just because of his accuracy and his downfield throwing ability. I mean, this might sound crazy, but I haven't seen a quarterback look that comfortable throwing the ball downfield besides Trevor Lawrence in the championship that Clemson beat Alabama. So that goes to show you that the talent that Kyle Trask has as far as, you know, throwing the ball around the field. I mean, he made some exceptionally great throws. I mean, just I mentioned earlier the throw that he could have had that was the Justin Shorter go route where he kind of overthrow on him. But I think that was more so of knowing your personnel and knowing who you're throwing to, because Justin Shorter is not a speed guy. So you kind of, just like I said earlier, you kind of want to put a little bit more air up under that so he can run up under that one. But I mean, you know, Kyle Trask, in my opinion, I think he should move on to the NFL. Let Emory Jones take over the reins and, you know, see what Emory Jones can do. I know what he can do from a running standpoint. I think all the Gator fans know what he can do from a running standpoint, but we would just like to see Emory Jones make that, you know, transition to be a throwing quarterback and have those downfield throws.
And Jones certainly has the arm when he's gotten the opportunity to throw. So he might not have the arm that Trask has, but he's got a good arm where he seems to be pretty accurate. He can fire it in there. I wonder if we're going to see the same type of accuracy on deep balls that we've seen. I don't think we're going to see that like we've seen with Trask. But it'll be interesting, man. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But I got to think your stock can't really get much higher if you're Kyle Trask. So I think it's an emotional moment. And when he sits back and kind of walks through it, I think it's going to be the common sense move to take that jump to the NFL. And especially with all the uncertainty with COVID, you got to make the jump while you can, I think. But it definitely would set off some interesting implications if he did decide to come back. So we'll have to keep an eye on that situation. All right. Our SEC bias is starting to show, Rob. We got to move on to the ACC here. Notre Dame, you know, I've been calling them frauds all season. I apologize to them officially. I even picked them to cover in this game. I thought that they kind of won me over. That North Carolina performance was really like, I liked the physicality I saw in that game, and that defense was playing well. And even though Clemson was getting some weapons back, I expected a fight from Notre Dame. Instead, we got the same old Notre Dame that we saw at the playoffs. It seems like every time Notre Dame gets on a big stage, this happens. And granted, they beat Clemson earlier in the season, but as we see now, those players that were missing were a big deal. That was a big deal on that Saturday night in South Bend. And I'm not sure why the playoff committee seems to think that that's an equally weighted victory as it would have been if they won on Saturday. But when I saw this game, just watching this game, it was not even remotely competitive, Rob. This is the type of performance that I would have thought would have kept Notre Dame out of the college football playoff. I wasn't happy with it. Notre Dame ends up losing 34-10. I feel like Clemson could have made it worse. Trevor Lawrence goes for over 300. ETN goes for 125 and touchdowns. Amari Rodgers, 8 receptions, 121 yards and a touchdown. Ian Book barely crosses the 200-yard threshold. I think this is this exact type performance we're going to see out of Notre Dame in the playoff.
Yeah, I tell you what, if you think Notre Dame didn't put up a fight against Clemson, they're damn sure not going to put up a fight against Alabama. I mean, Ian Book didn't throw or rush for a touchdown. I mean, Kyron Williams got held for under 100 yards rushing. So this Clemson team, when Trevor Lawrence is at the quarterback position, this Clemson team just plays differently. And I know, DJ played a hell of a game earlier in the year when they met Notre Dame. But once again, DJ is not Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence has been there. He's done that. And when Trevor Lawrence is on a roll, he's unstoppable. And that's probably why he's going to be a consensus #1 draft pick coming out this year. This Clemson team just rallies around them. This defense was flying around. Like it really seemed like they had a bad taste in their mouth for the loss earlier in the season to Notre Dame, and they came out with a vengeance. And Notre Dame didn't have any answers whatsoever. I mean, they showed promise, early in the game on the first drive. But after that, the wheels just kind of fell off and Clemson just kind of dominated. And it goes to show you, I just don't understand what the College Football Playoff Committee is looking at when they analyze these teams. Because if you ask me, I just didn't think Notre Dame would get in if they had a loss. I mean, definitely, Notre Dame, if Notre Dame comes out and beat Clemson, they're in automatically, no questions asked. But they go out and they lose, in a pretty bad fashion, and they still get in. I just don't understand that, especially when you have an undefeated Cincinnati team out there. Like yes. And then on top of that, I know, Florida had 2 losses coming into the SEC championship, but look at the matchup and look at the fight that Florida showed against a clear-cut #1 Alabama team versus a playoff team in Notre Dame who pretty much lay an egg against Clemson. So I just don't understand what the committee is doing in this regard. As far as, weighing the team's strength of schedule. I know it's a COVID year, pandemic year, but at the end of the day, if you tell me Notre Dame is one of the top 4 teams in the nation, I'm not buying that.
No,
and
no.
I know they get a lot of, extra add-on because they're Notre Dame and their ratings and everything like that. But I tell you what, Ian Book, if he can't play like the way that he played early in the year, I just don't see Notre Dame. I really see Notre Dame getting blown out against Alabama, honestly.
Yeah, we're going to talk playoffs after the rest of the games here. So we're going to dive into that. So I'll save that. I'll save my thoughts on that for that moment. But let's move to the Big Ten. Ohio State 22, Northwestern 10. Northwestern came out and quite frankly, everyone was hard on Ohio State. I was more impressed with Northwestern than I was disappointed in Ohio State, if that makes sense. I thought Northwestern had a good game plan. They kept things in front of them. Justin Fields, I felt like, was overly anxious and aggressive, and I felt like he kept trying to go downfield. We saw he had a thumb injury in the second half that clearly impacted his performance, but luckily Ohio State gets a top-notch transfer from Oklahoma who hasn't made a lot of noise this season. It's been relatively disappointing, actually, in Columbus. Trey Sermon. And the Buckeyes, when things aren't going well through the air, they can lean on a guy who hasn't done much all year to just break Eddie George's school record from 1995 in rushing yards. 29 carries, 331 yards, 2 touchdowns for Trey Sermon. And Trey Sermon looked like a video game character that it just looked like it was the first time you ever played on like the Heisman level on the old NCAA video games, and he could not be brought down. He was unbelievable. He's jumping over guys. He broke off so many big runs. It was unbelievable. But that's what you see. That's the difference between Ohio State and Northwestern right there. Is even with 20 players missing for Ohio State, you got an NFL quality offensive line and a guy who's going to be playing on Sundays in the backfield there with Sermon. And the Buckeyes just dominated, mauled the Wildcats in the second half, shut them out on defense, get a 22-10 victory in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I think Trey Sermon had a field day on this Northwestern defense, but just like you said, I think Pat Fitzgerald and his Northwestern team came out with a great game plan. I honestly, even though with Trey Sermon going over the 300-yard mark, Northwestern was right there. They had a chance to kind of win this game. They just couldn't put points up on the board. I thought Peyton Ramsey played pretty well. He kind of got he kind of got rattled in the second half, but I really like this Northwestern defense. I think Pat Fitzgerald's a hell of a coach. But once again, we talk about these teams like the Stanfords, the Vanderbilts, the Northwesterns, these academic schools where they're getting good talent in, but they're not getting the quality playmakers that you need to kind of compete with the Ohio States, the Clemsons, and the Alabamas of the world. So if Northwestern had a little bit more playmakers on that offense side of the ball, I think we can be singing a different tune right about now. And Ohio State might be the team looking from the outside looking in that probably wouldn't get into the college football playoffs if they lost this game. And everyone's talking about how the number of games that Ohio State has played. If they would have went out and lost this game, they definitely wouldn't have got in. That probably would have opened up a door for, Cincinnati, or that would open up a door for, one of those other teams that's Texas A&M. So I really, just like you said, it wasn't really Ohio State. I was more impressed with Northwestern and the fight that they put up.
I love this Northwestern program. Pat Fitzgerald, I hope they never get tired of it. I hope there's no disillusionment among the Northwestern fan base or boosters that they can do better than what they're doing, because they can't. This is the height of Northwestern football right now. To be in the conference championship game is an accomplishment in and of itself. I know it's pandemic year. I know you're probably bummed out that you lost to Michigan State, but he has this program cooking, and the way they played in the first half should have made every Northwestern alum proud. I mean, that was a hell of a first half performance by the Wildcats. And I know the Buckeyes are down. The talent gap between these two programs is significant, though. And you're never going to be, Northwestern's never going to be a school that rattles off Big Ten titles at the rate that Ohio State does. But to show up with this kind of fight, if you're Vanderbilt, you got to look yourself in the mirror and say, we have no excuse. We got to do better. If you're like any of these schools that say academics holds them down or whatever, no excuse. Northwestern's out there playing this type of football in the first half against Ohio State. You have no excuse. Ohio State had to completely – Justin Fields is pretty much the unanimous number 2 pick in the draft in April. Wouldn't you agree with that? Or in May? Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that.
They made him shut down. Like, to the point, I know he got injured in the second half. His numbers were, but they basically shut him down. You see, I think we talk about the transfer portal in terms of Trey Sermon. Certainly the big boys are going to benefit from it too. But I think the transfer portal, look at Peyton Ramsey, great quarterback for Indiana. 9 rushes for 44 yards. Dude was quicker than I thought he was. He can run a little bit. I think Northwestern has to be, if you want to sneak a Big Ten title in every few years, I think they've showed they're more than capable of getting to the game. But if they want to actually beat Ohio State and actually win a Big Ten title, like say once a decade, I think they need to be watching those transfer portals. And some of those guys, those 4 or 5-star guys they didn't get on the high school circuit. Hey, if you have a situation where you're a backup and you got an opportunity to go to Northwestern and they got that beautiful facility on the lake and everything, and you get to play in the Big Ten West, an opportunity to win the Big Ten West every couple of years, play for a guy who's, I think is, if he's not already at legend status, is getting there in Pat Fitzgerald. I think Northwestern could really benefit from the loosening of the transfer rules. They could pick up guys that they might not have a shot at out of a high school. And I think you could see the Wildcats just be a real steady force out of the Big Ten West, Rob.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you. I honestly made this comparison watching this game this past weekend, Northwestern Ohio State game, where Pat Fitzgerald could kind of be in that same, D'Antoni line where, at Michigan
D'Antonio,
State,
right.
like how Michigan State, they don't have the great 5-star, 4-star recruits coming out of high school, but they're getting those three-star guys, and it fits their system. And D'Antoni is doing the most with the least. And I feel like Pat Fitzgerald is headed in that direction. But just like you said, he has to, hit on those transfer portal guys,
right.
those 4-star guys who don't really pan out at their, first school of choice, and they're transferring over. So I think if he can kind of do that, I think you're right. He's right in the thick of things of, maybe not winning the Big Ten championship consistently, but at least kind of, sneaking one in there every, 4 or 5 years. So, and if you're a Northwestern alum and you're a Northwestern fan, I mean, winning a Big Ten title every 4 or 5 years, I think, they'll take that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Winning it, yeah, once a decade would be magical. Just getting to the game, once every 5 years is an accomplishment enough. I think that we're looking at the current situation in the Big Ten West. Hey, Nebraska seems reluctant to want to step up and become a power again for whatever reason. Wisconsin is good, but they're not untouched. They're not on the Ohio State level of untouchability. So if you get a home game, I just think Northwestern's one of those programs where they need to have a year where they have more senior, they have more upperclassmen, they have guys who have started for a couple of years, they have that experience edge, and then they have a nice schedule on top of it. And if you combine those things together every couple of years, I think you'll see them in Indianapolis. And I think with the transfer portal, you can see guys really look at. I mean, we've seen the last couple of years Peyton Ramsey, and then the 5-star kid out of Clemson who ended up busting out up there, Hunter Johnson, right? It didn't work out with him, but they got a 5-star quarterback to go to Northwestern. When has that ever happened in the history of Northwestern football? The transfer portal can make things really interesting over the next couple of years for these programs that you might not be able to compete with that 5-star kid that wants to go to Ohio State out of high school, but you can grab them out of a transfer portal. So that's where I think Northwestern can make up the gap with Ohio State and maybe string together an upset one of these years. But just really, I was more proud of Northwestern than I was disappointed in Ohio State. Do you agree with that assessment?
No, I definitely agree. And one of my favorite plays of the game was the one-hand interception from Brandon Joseph, the freshman, where he kind of, picked off Justin Fields in the end zone.
It wasn't even a bad throw. It was an okay throw.
It wasn't a bad throw. I mean, it was one of those 50-50 balls, and Brandon Joseph just made the play on the ball, and he came down with the interception. And that was before halftime. So that was a big play in the game. And I know he's a freshman. So if Pat Fitzgerald can kind of keep these guys coming in to this talent level, I think they're going to be good moving forward. But after this game, I know it's a lot of talk about Pat Fitzgerald actually, taking on a bigger job, or actually,
I hope not
moving to the NFL. So
I hope not.
That's something that we definitely have to keep our eye on moving forward.
Do you see that happening? I know he's been mentioned for NFL jobs before. This isn't the first time this has happened, by the way, but I just think the grass is not greener, Pat. Don't do it. Stay at Northwestern forever.
Yeah, I mean, he can kind of carve out, that Kirk Ferentz role that Kirk Ferentz carved out at Iowa, where you're a lifer in that program.
Yeah.
And once again, I don't think on a national level or the Northwestern fan base expect Northwestern to be in a Big Ten title game every year. So just to your point, if you can kind of get there every 4 to 5 years and kind of, maybe sneak a win in, I think, Pat Fitzgerald could be a lifer at Northwestern. I think they'll give him anything he wants. And just like you said, you mentioned the facilities earlier, Northwestern has some of the best facilities in the nation. So, if you can pitch that to these, high school kids coming out, I think, that's a great pitch to say, hey, we have these facilities and we're trying to build something here. We don't have that tradition that the Ohio States or the Texas or, the Florida States or the Florida have, but we're trying to build that and come here and be a part of that. So I think Pat Fitzgerald's a hell of a coach. And just like you said, I want him to be there for life.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, he'll keep that program rolling every few years like this. All right. I know we spent a ton of time on the first few games, but these are all playoff teams, and we wanted to make sure we cover those well. So just give me a quick hitters. Tennessee falls to Texas A&M 34-13. Aggies obviously left out of the playoffs. We'll talk about that at the end of the show, but Tennessee really no signs of life on offense once again. But luckily the Volunteers are 3-7. You're going bowling, going to the Liberty Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the first quarter of this game, and Tennessee actually kind of came out and played physical ball.
They threw a couple punches.
Yeah, they actually competed, but overall they just kind of got wore down. And Texas A&M, the better team, they kind of won out at the end. But Tennessee, just that program has a long way to go moving forward. We've been talking about Tennessee for the longest, and for some reason it seems like they're in that same situation as Miami. I mean, right now it seems like the Hurricanes are a little bit further along than Tennessee, but it just seems like they're in that conversation where, okay, well, when is the Tennessee Vols coming back to prominence? And it just seems like, okay, this is their year, and never mind, it's not their year. Okay, next year is going to be their year. Never mind, it's not that year. So we're still waiting for this Tennessee program to get back to the glory days. And don't get me wrong, they're hitting it hard on the recruiting trail. They're bringing those 5-star. They're bringing those 4-star.
What did Miami find this year, though? What did Miami find this year that Tennessee has not had in a while?
A good offensive coordinator.
And a quarterback, right? Like, I mean, Tennessee needs to figure out, and I know they think they might have it with Harrison Bailey. They got a couple guys there they think they got, but I'm sorry if I'm going to question the judgment of Tennessee football in terms of quarterbacks, because they've been rolling out Jared Garantano for the last 4 years. By the way, Garantano hits the transfer portal. Pick him up, Rutgers. Do it. Jersey boy. Get him. But I think Garantano, he's not a bad quarterback. I just think he didn't have a lot of weapons around him, number one. But he did struggle at times. He had his struggles, and he definitely needed a certain type of game plan built around him. And I never thought they tailored the offense to him very well. I thought they could have used him more in the running game than they did. I thought they always made him. It seemed like every time I watched Tennessee, Garantano was just dropping back, and they're trying to make him a drop back quarterback. When in reality, like I'd want to see him in the shotgun running a read option most of the time.
Yeah. I think a lot of these universities and these college programs have to understand. I know, you have a guy out there that might have a 4-star, 5-star rating come out of high school, but playing in the SEC, it's talks out there that the SEC is the developmental league for the NFL for a reason, and that's for certain. It's just certain people can't play in the SEC, and it's not a knock on the kid. You can play in the Big Ten, you can play in the Big 12, you can play in the Pac-12. The SEC is just such a physical dominant league that every 5-star, 4-star guy cannot play in the SEC. And perfect example, we see Nick Starkel, Mississippi State former quarterback. He had his ups and downs in Mississippi State and the SEC, but he didn't really look good until he went out to San Jose State, and he was balling on a different level. And don't get me wrong, I'm pretty sure the SEC prepared him for that, but once again, he wasn't doing that in the SEC. So we've seen multiple quarterbacks and multiple players who transfer out of the SEC conference and do fairly well, but they didn't do it in the SEC. So that SEC conference is just on a different level, and every 5-star, 4-star kid cannot play in the SEC. I'm sorry to say that, Nick, but it's the ultimate truth.
Hey, don't apologize. You're totally right about it. I actually saw Garantano play in high school, and I remember hearing he was going to Tennessee, and I was like, really? It was nothing against the kid. For all I know, he's a good kid and everything. I mean, just like I didn't see it. There's some things there where you're just like, yeah, I don't know. You think Tennessee, you think like Peyton Manning, you think like T. Martin, like those explosive offenses back in the day. And I don't know. They got to figure something out there, though. But we know Pruitt can recruit, so maybe they'll figure it out soon. But that quarterback position needs to be addressed, whether it's to the transfer portal or something. You got to figure out you cannot roll into 2021 without a quarterback you're confident in, Tennessee. You can't do it. Jimbo Fisher after the game. We play in the best league with best players. That's much as an eye test as anything. 8 wins in the SEC. I'd like to see someone else do that. He mentioned he's got 7 straight wins in the SEC. That's more than some teams even play this year. Is he like the fastest talker you've ever heard in an interview?
Yeah, he talks really, really fast.
It reminds me of a NASCAR race every single time, like the announcers in NASCAR. That I've watched a lot of that. Just what it sounds like.
I mean, to Jimbo's defense, he does have he the SEC hands down is the best conference.
This year,
I think maybe not this year within the pandemic year.
It's not the best year in the SEC. It's not.
It's not. But ultimately, from the outside looking in, everyone knows the type of players and the caliber type of players that comes out of SEC. I mean, you can see it last year from that LSU team. I mean, that LSU team just routed off so many people.
The top level is still
there.
Draft. The top level is still there, but I question after those top 4 teams, I would call this year a down year in the SEC overall.
Yeah, but actually, Kellen Mond made a great point in regards to, everyone talk about, the SEC. It's certain teams in the SEC that they can rattle off consistent wins week in and week out if they were in another conference. So I tell you what,
That's true.
Arkansas can rattle off, some wins if they're in another conference. South Carolina can rattle off some wins if they were in another conference. Hell, we talk about Tennessee and we beat up Tennessee on a daily basis on our pod. But I tell you what, if Tennessee was in another conference, Tennessee could rattle off some wins. So it's an indictment of how tough the SEC is. And I think Jimbo Fisher does have a gripe in regards to, playing an all SEC schedule to certain teams playing, 5 or 6 games. And that is a knock on Ohio State. He is knocking Ohio State. That's the only team that he's talking about.
He should.
Which is true. But I tell you what, Texas A&M, they did get a raw deal. But once again, when you're in the SEC West, in order to get to the playoff game, you have to beat Alabama. And that's the part of being in the SEC West. And I do feel for Jimbo Fisher in this sense, but I really feel like, Texas A&M got a raw deal. But once, just like you said, we're going to talk about that later in the episode. But to Jimbo's point, I really think, Texas A&M had a tremendous year. Did they get, the short end of the stick? That's up for debate. But I do agree with, Kellen Mond and Jimbo Fisher saying, hey, everyone talks about the SEC and the bottom tier teams that's in the SEC. But if those teams goes into another conference, they're rattling off wins and they might be winning some of those conference championships. I tell you that.
Arkansas, Ole Miss, there was some interesting how LSU got it together by the end of the year. So I get what you're saying, but I guess I'm used to like it just seemed like the SEC was like kind of average outside of the top 4 this year. That's the only thing. But you got some good points here, Rob. You got some good points. All right, we're going to do 30 seconds on the Big 12 title game. Iowa State almost comes back. What are you doing at the end of the game, Brock Purdy? So that's my quick reaction to that game. Like that throw at the end of the game was just unbelievably dumb. I'm not sure what he was even seeing. So what do you got on the Big 12 title game, Rob?
Yeah, before we made our picks earlier last week, I pretty much said Oklahoma was going to take this game. And the only reason why is because they've been there, they've done that. Lincoln Riley has been there. So I think the experience weighed out in that regard. And I think Oklahoma just have more talent than Iowa State. Great season for Iowa State. They got the upset win against Oklahoma early in the year. But at the end of the day, Oklahoma's clicking on all cylinders right now. Spencer Rattler is playing better ball than what he was playing earlier in the year, and Lincoln Riley is doing a better job of getting his playmakers the ball. So I thought Oklahoma was going to win this game, and they for sure came out and won the game. But, you tip your hats off to Matt Campbell and Iowa State for having a hell of a season. Hopefully they can kind of keep that momentum rolling until, next season and kind of racking up the wins to kind of be mentioned in that Big 12 title game consistently. But Oklahoma, they've been there, they've done that. They're the blue blood of the Big 12. So I definitely gave them the edge to win this game.
All right, 1 minute on the AAC title game. Cincinnati, if you wanted to be mentioned for a playoff spot, you had to have a convincing victory here. I'm not even sure that would have done it, but battling Tulsa down to the wire just wasn't going to do it. Unfortunately, the committee just does not seem to respect the American Athletic Conference. We happen to be a very pro AAC podcast here, but just for the sake of time here, just Cincinnati last second field goal in the rain. Good job on finishing out this season. You get a fun matchup with Georgia in the Peach Bowl. I'm disappointed that they didn't get real consideration for the playoff, but something we got to do something about this system here. But I think the Bearcats, you got nothing to hang your heads about. Obviously, undefeated season AAC champs.
Yeah, and just like you said, even if Cincinnati came out and blew out Tulsa and won the conference championship, I still don't think they were got any looks in regards to the college football playoff. Because once again, Cincinnati, they're not a household name. For the longest, when you talk about the Cincinnati Bearcats, you might be looking at their basketball program over their football program. So they're making a transition where they're having a good basketball team, good football team, kind of like what we're seeing with North Carolina under Mack Brown. So I just think, Cincinnati did get snubbed. Even if they didn't get in the college football playoff, they definitely should got a hard look than what they got. But tough for Cincinnati, but hell of a season for them and great win.
You think Luke Fickell sticks around for another year?
I think, if he can get a better job, I don't think he sticks around for another year. I haven't heard his name mentioned in any big time programs out there, but I'm pretty sure if he gets a shot to move on to a big time program, he's going to take it.
Boise State, San Jose State, the Spartans win the Mountain West 34-20 in convincing fashion. Boise State says, you know what? We're not even going to go to a bowl game. Never mind. So undefeated San Jose State, unlike Coastal Carolina, unlike Cincinnati, we definitely didn't even talk about them for a playoff spot. But the 7-game thing, you might get away with it if you're Ohio State. If you're San Jose State, I'm sorry. You just didn't play a complete season there. But great season for the Spartans. We don't see them typically winning conference titles, so good accomplishment for that program out there.
Yeah, you're right about that. And once again, one of the players that kind of, helped lead that charge is Nick Starkel, the former Mississippi State quarterback who entered the transfer portal. So you hit the nail on the head earlier in regards to these lower tier teams actually getting in the transfer portal and getting some of these guys to help their program moving forward. So that was a perfect example of that.
Right. All right, let's go. I'm going to read off the rest of the games here. Washington State falls to Utah 45-28. Army wins Commander-in-Chief trophy 10-7. We're going to talk about Army in a minute over Air Force. LSU 53, Ole Miss 48. Good momentum for Ed O to go in the offseason with a win over Ole Miss as back-to-back wins over Florida and Ole Miss there. Missouri falls to Mississippi State. The Tigers were very shorthanded, but Mississippi State 51-32. Good momentum for Leach. They're going bowling, I believe, too. Mississippi State's going bowling. We'll read off the bowl schedule in a minute here. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Badgers 2017 OT. Penn State 56-21 over Illinois. UCLA falls in double overtime to Stanford. They try to go for 2. They end up missing it. 48-47. Stanford wins. And Arizona State puts it on Oregon State 46-33 to conclude the Pac-12 schedule. Rob, the playoffs were selected yesterday. Number 1, Alabama will face number 4, Notre Dame. Number 2, Clemson will face number 3, Ohio State. Here are my biggest issues with this field. 1, I think you screwed up putting Notre Dame in. We talked about it earlier. I think Notre Dame, they had a nice season. They have a good team. I think Texas A&M would beat Notre Dame on a neutral field. I think Texas A&M is clearly a better team. Now, if I were the commissioner of college football and I could choose anything, we'd be talking about Cincinnati or Coastal Carolina for that 4th playoff spot because Texas A&M, you had your playoff moment. So before you go feeling ripped off completely, you lost by 4 touchdowns at Alabama, okay? All right. Your hands are in the mercy of other people when you go and lose games by 4 touchdowns, Texas A&M. So I don't feel that bad for Texas A&M. Notre Dame, you should have lost by 4 touchdowns to Clemson. You damn well near did, 34-10. But it's an ugly enough performance to show me the Irish do not belong on that stage. They're a good team, but good team, plenty of good teams playing in New Year's 6. I would have preferred to see Cincinnati get an opportunity. Strength of schedule, whatever, I know. But this year of all years, Cincinnati attempted to play a full season. You're clearly not punishing Ohio State for a 6-game schedule. Why can't you give a group of 5 team a shot this year? Why can't Coastal get a shot? Why can't Cincinnati get a shot? I'm very annoyed with this playoff field. I think Alabama Notre Dame's about as boring as you can get right now. I know they have two traditional power names. I know those uniforms are going to look great on the field with each other. I know I'll end up being excited to watch the game when it comes here and everything. But right now, I just don't think Notre Dame stands a chance. I think Notre Dame's going to lose by 4 touchdowns. I think we're in for a very boring game right there. The other game, Ohio State and Clemson, I certainly love watching these two teams play, but I guess the playoff committee doesn't have an issue with rematches. I mean, God knows we've watched Clemson and Alabama 100 times, but I feel differently about that because that's usually not a semifinal matchup. But if you're the committee, do you not take into account that these teams have played now 3 times in the last 5 years in the semis? Ohio State and Clemson. Like, can we get a different matchup? And the way you could have done it if you were the committee is you pick Texas A&M, you throw them in the 3 spot to play Clemson at 2, and you punish Ohio State for the short schedule. And it, not nothing personal against Ohio State, but the Big Ten. You punish the Big Ten for the shortened schedule. You let Ohio State in, but they play Alabama. And so you got Ohio State versus Alabama, Clemson, Texas A&M. Did I not make a more appealing playoff field just now, Rob?
You really did. But just going back to Cincinnati, it really seemed like the college football playoff kind of knocked, Cincinnati because of its conference affiliation. And it kind of seems like, all right, I know it's a lot of variables that go in. I'm not behind the closed doors. I don't know what they're discussing. But, from everything that I read, from everything I hear, it kind of seems like, strength of schedule plays a role. It kind of seems like, the eye test plays a role. And after Notre Dame losing to Clemson, they could have lost by 4 touchdowns. It's no way that from my own eyes that I can say Notre Dame is equivocally the top 4 team in the nation in regards to, being put in the college football playoffs. I think, of course, Texas A&M lost to, Alabama by 4 touchdowns. But at the end of the day, Texas A&M beat, Florida by a field goal. And Florida just pretty much went toe-to-toe with the number 1 team in the nation. So that has to, you kind of have to put that, you have to weigh that in there, the common opponents or whatever. And at the end of the day, the only common opponent that Notre Dame has is Clemson. And they played them twice, and they beat them without Trevor Lawrence. And let Dabo Swinney say it, Trevor Lawrence should be the Heisman Trophy winner. So you beat Clemson without their Heisman Trophy winner. But when they get their Heisman Trophy winner back, you get pretty much dismantled. So I'm just not a fan of Notre Dame being in. I kind of see this ending up where Alabama played Notre Dame. You remember when Monte Teo was at Notre Dame, and Alabama just kind of, shredded him. So I kind of see this game, shaping up to be similar to that particular college football playoff time. I'm just not a big fan of Notre Dame getting in, and I understand what you're saying about Texas A&M. They had their shot. I think if they played Alabama a little bit closer early in the year, and they beat Florida on the field goal, I think the college football playoff would have gave them a little bit more credence to getting in. But just like you said, I think you kind of have to not punish Ohio State, but I think you have to put Ohio State at 4 and kind of switch up the matchups so we don't get the same matchups that we've been getting the last couple of years. So I definitely agree with you in that regards, Nick.
Yeah, just mix it up for us, man. Like you've been feeding us the same thing, and I think they did a really bad job on this field, and I'm not super stoked. We just watched Ohio State Clemson last year. It was a great game, but I don't know, man. This Ohio State team, from what I've seen this year, shortened season, I'm not sure the Buckeyes are up for this. I think we might have 2 stinkers on our hands for the semis. So another Alabama Clemson final.
It's definitely shaping up for another Alabama Clemson final.
Yeah.
And once again, I mean, in that regard, I said earlier, I haven't really seen a quarterback throw the ball vertically and make Alabama defense look like that since Trevor Lawrence did in the championship a couple years ago. So I can kind of see Trevor Lawrence getting after that Alabama secondary in the championship. But, TBD, it's going to be to be decided because maybe
it'll be a hell of a matchup. Clemson Alabama will be a hell of a matchup.
Maybe Notre Dame upsets Alabama. Who knows? Maybe they shut me up. I just don't see it happening, but maybe they do shut me up, and maybe Ohio State beats Clemson. I know it's going to be, some bad blood there, especially from the targeting call last year with Shaun Wade. That was another reason why Shaun Wade said he wanted to come back. So he opted back in to kind of be in this position, and he gets the opportunity to play this Clemson team that, they lost to last year. So it's going to be a great storyline for that Clemson Ohio State game. But I tell you what, if Justin Fields is banged up like I think he's banged up, I really don't see them going out and winning this game against Clemson.
Ohio State needs to show up with their A game for sure. And I don't think we've seen Ohio State's A game yet. That's what's concerning.
I tell you what, it's no way Ohio State is going to beat Clemson with 22 players being out. And,
no.
And did you see the Big Ten change the COVID protocol?
Yeah, because they care so much about player safety. They just, the Big Ten, don't even get me started. I've ranted enough about them on this podcast. We could talk about that later. But yeah, 21 days down to 17. Woohoo! Yippee! Well, it's almost like you didn't want to play the season, Big Ten. Jeez, it really speaks to Ohio State, the respect that Ohio State commands in college football, that they're even in this field.
Yeah, and that goes to show you, and it kind of comes down where, what is the college football playoff committee looking at? Are they looking at, okay, we want to put the household names in here, or we want to put the blue blood programs in here, or do we want to put the best teams on the field? So I think that's one thing that's leaving a sour taste in the college football playoff in the fans of college football, because it kind of seems like, it's the same thing year in and year out, where you're putting these blue blood teams in there where you can put someone else in there to kind of shake up everything. So I don't know. I know ratings is a key factor in a lot of this from a political standpoint, dollars, the monetary value of these teams getting in there. I understand that. But at the end of the day, if you're going to tell me Notre Dame is one of the top 4 teams and they can kind of they will beat Cincinnati, Texas A&M, Florida, Georgia, Iowa State, Oklahoma on a neutral field, I'm not buying it. I'm really not buying that.
I mean, I'll tell you, one of the New Year's 6 games. So let's go over the New Year's 6 games. Obviously, I'm excited for Oklahoma, Florida in the Cotton Bowl. Texas A&M plays North Carolina. That should be a fun matchup. Oregon, Iowa State. Iowa State makes it with 3 losses. Florida makes it in with 3 losses. We leave Coastal Carolina out of the deal. I think Florida deserves to be there, though, because Florida has played the schedule they played was tougher, much tougher than any of these teams here. But does Iowa State deserve to be in the Fiesta Bowl over Coastal Carolina? I don't really think so. Does North Carolina deserve to be in the Orange Bowl over Coastal?
I don't think so. But at the end of the day, the Orange Bowl, they take the highest rated, ACC team.
Yeah.
So that and honestly, I think they should change that if you ask me. And
they don't want to. It's good for them to do that too, because that's a good geographic partner too for them, right?
Yeah,
they're hoping they're going to grab Miami every few years on that. But in the Peach Bowl, you got Cincinnati versus Georgia, and I think that's the type of matchup where the Orange Bowl is trying to avoid that type of matchup more often than not. But Cincinnati, Georgia, to me, I think that's one of the most interesting matchups of bowl season right now.
Yeah, I mean, because you got to think about it. Is Cincinnati going to come out and say, "Hey, we should have been in the college football playoff"? We've seen this time and time again. I think we saw this, 1 year under Will Muschamp when Florida had an amazing year, and then they thought they should have been in the college football playoffs, but then they go out and they play Louisville and they get, Teddy Bridgewater and Devontae Parker just have a field day on that Florida defense. So what Cincinnati team is going to show up? If the Cincinnati team that's going to show up, I think they can beat Georgia in the Peach Bowl. However, we've seen this a couple of years ago, maybe was it last year, the year before, where Georgia, plays Baylor and they lose that game.
They beat Baylor, right?
They
lost
beat
to
Baylor.
Texas.
They lost to Texas. There you go.
I'm going to reverse the question. Which Georgia team shows up? That's what I want to see. How does Georgia look in this game? I think if Georgia shows up and plays their game, I think they could definitely smack Cincinnati. But hey, if Cincinnati goes down to Atlanta in Georgia's backyard and beats Georgia, you're going to hear a lot about. I think you know what? I hope Cincinnati pulls a UCF and declares themselves champs. Let's do it, Cincinnati. Get that campaign off the ground.
Yeah, that would definitely be an awesome. But at the end of the day, they have to go out and they have to beat Georgia in a
Yeah.
orderly fashion, and then that will be the ultimate shot to the college football playoff committee right there.
What if Coastal does the same and you got 3 teams declare themselves champions? I would love that.
That would definitely be a story that we will have to talk about. Like we'll have to dedicate a whole pod for that.
But the biggest entity left out of the playoffs is going to be the Rose Bowl, dude. Did you see this? They moved it to Arlington, Texas, and they can't officially call it the Rose Bowl, so I think they're calling it the College Football Playoff Semifinal, like presented by Capital One. They can't use the Rose Bowl term, but they pulled it out of LA. Obviously, California, heavy restrictions on who can do what out there. So they said, all right, well, we're going to just take the game away from you guys. And I'm sure they'll figure out another year for the Rose Bowl to do it. But the Rose Bowl is one of my favorite football environments of the year. So for those of us that love the Rose Bowl, you're not going to see any Rose Bowl this year.
Yeah, that sucks because we know the Rose Bowl as being the granddaddy of them all, and we're not gonna get that. I mean, we wasn't gonna get the parade that normally goes with the Rose Bowl. And
I could live without the parade.
Honestly, I'm a parade guy.
Yeah, I'm not.
I love parades. I love, the Macy Day parades. I love the Rose Bowl parades. Like I am a parade guy. I just love the atmosphere that parades have, the energy that goes around that. And I was already hurt to not have the parade, but to not have the Rose Bowl, that hurts really deep. But once again, it just really seems like Jerry World keeps getting all the games. He's getting the quote unquote Rose Bowl. He's getting the Cotton Bowl. He's getting, the Texas state championship high school game. So it
football
just seems
mecca,
like,
man.
Yeah, it just seems like Jerry World is turning into the Madison Square Garden of football arenas.
And you know what? They're allowing, I think, like 16,000. They said that's why they put Bama there. So Bama's going to play Notre Dame there. Clemson, Ohio State going to play in the Sugar Bowl where there's 3,000 people allowed, and then Hard Rock Stadium in Florida is going to host. I mean, really, the NFL and college football should be grateful that both of their championship games this year, the Super Bowl is going to be in Tampa, the national title game is going to be in Miami. That Florida is technically allowing the full stadiums to be filled if they want. I don't see either entity doing that, but Florida has no restrictions on that stuff, so they got full say on what they want to do, basically. So playoffs. Neither one of us are too happy about it, sounds like. Overall, in the bowl game scene, just a quick rundown of the bowl games. Following bowl games are canceled. Redbox Bowl, Hawaii Bowl, Bahamas Bowl, Holiday Bowl, Quick Lane Bowl, Las Vegas Bowl, Birmingham Bowl, Sun Bowl, LA Bowl, Pinstripe Bowl, Military Bowl, and the Independence Bowl. And Pac-12, obviously, outside of Oregon, pretty much straight up opted out of bowl season. The rest of the Pac-12 did. But the Independence Bowl being canceled is a big deal because they're supposed to play a Pac-12 team, but now Army is left without a date. So Army doesn't have a date to the prom, Rob. And they're 9-2. They're saying, we want to play. Like, what the hell? USC was talking about that's what Monken was tearing into USC. He's like, man, a week ago, they're talking about wanting to play the playoffs. Now they're opting out of bowl season. Boise State, same thing. So Army is just left without a date. Meanwhile, you got like South Carolina is going to go to a bowl game. Mississippi State, Tennessee, all these terrible records are going to bowl games. 9-2 Army sitting there on the sideline.
Yeah, that's definitely tough for Army. And I'll tell you what, I saw some reports where Army saying, hey, if a COVID uptick or a COVID spike hits and, a team has to opt out of the bowl game, hey, we're replacement. We're going to be there and we're ready to play. So
I think they'll find it.
I think Army potentially find a bowl game where they can kind of play. But just like you said, 9-2, this is a difficult year. But to have Army on the outside looking in at 9-2 because, other teams kind of want to opt out, I think, that's a little egregious if you ask me.
Yeah, it really sucks. It really does. Rob, long episode here on the college football podcast today, but we had a lot to talk about. Big week, obviously, with the conference title games. Regular season college football is officially over. We immediately jump into bowl season this week. I just a quick rundown of the schedule for the bowl games. App State at North Texas. Tulane is on Monday at 2:30. On Tuesday, December 22nd, Tulane at Nevada. UCF at BYU. Can't wait for that game Tuesday night. Wednesday, Louisiana Tech, Georgia Southern. Memphis at FAU. Thursday on Christmas Eve, Hawaii at Houston. Friday, December 25th on Christmas Day, you got a bowl game this year, Marshall at Buffalo. And we will talk about the rest of the games on next week's podcast, but that at least gets us through this week. So, any of those games stand out to you, Rob? I like the UCF BYU matchup. That one really catches my eye.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I just want to see how Zach Wilson is going to play after, the Coastal Carolina game where he was on a national stage. So UCF is definitely a good team. So this would definitely be a good matchup for BYU and Zach Wilson. And I'm just going to watch Zach Wilson to see if he can make that next jump and see how he plays. Because 9 times out of 10, he's probably going to go put his name in the NFL draft. So I definitely going to keep an eye out and see how he plays.
Yep. All right. Well, good episode, Rob. We covered a lot of territory there, covered a lot of ground. Looking forward to jumping into bowl season here with college football, and we'll jump into recruiting after that on this podcast. So we'll thank you for listening to American Football Stories, and we'll send you out with a word from our sponsor, Coachmate.
American Football Stories is brought to you by Coachmate. Coachmate is a great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips similar to the graphics you see on TV. Coachmate offers the ability to clearly tell a straight video while increasing retention of information in a shorter amount of time. Up your game with Coachmate today.
Thank you for listening to American Football Stories podcast. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, American Football Stories. We are working to grow our network on YouTube and we'd love to have you subscribe. You can find us also on Apple Podcasts, on Twitter at American FB Story, and on our website, AmericanFootballStories.com. I am Robert Parker. My co-host is Nick Newsom. This has been another episode of American Football Stories.